Picture this: a towering beacon of human achievement, its shelves heavy with the weight of countless scrolls containing everything the ancient world knew. The Library of Alexandria wasn't just a collection of books. It was a living, breathing monument to curiosity, a place where the brightest minds of antiquity gathered to debate, discover, and push the boundaries of understanding. For centuries, it stood as a symbol of what humanity could accomplish when knowledge was shared and preserved. But then, in a devastating twist of fate, it was lost, taking with it secrets we may never recover. This isn't just the story of a building burning down. It's the story of how a single catastrophe may have altered the course of civilization itself. Think about all the wisdom we take for granted today: the laws of physics, the foundations of medicine, the poetry that stirs our souls. Much of it traces back to the thinkers who walked those halls, their ideas carefully recorded on papyrus and parchment. But what if I told you that what we've recovered is just a fraction of what once existed? The Library of Alexandria held works by geniuses whose names we'll never know, theories that could have reshaped science centuries earlier, and entire languages that have faded into silence. When it disappeared, it wasn't just books that burned, it was potential. The kind of potential that could have propelled humanity forward in ways we can only imagine. So what really happened to this legendary treasure trove of knowledge? Who was responsible for its destruction, and why does its absence still haunt us today? The answers are tangled in myths, conflicting accounts, and historical mysteries we're still unraveling. But one thing is certain: the loss of the Library of Alexandria wasn't just a tragedy for its time. It was a theft from the future, our future. As we peel back the layers of this ancient enigma, you'll see how one library's fate holds a mirror to our own relationship with knowledge, reminding us how fragile progress truly is. This is the story of the greatest intellectual catastrophe in history, and why it matters now more than ever. To understand the true scale of this intellectual revolution, we have to step back into the bustling streets of ancient Alexandria, a city built as a grand experiment in human potential. The Ptolemies didn't just want a library, they envisioned an engine of discovery, a place where the entire world's knowledge could be gathered, studied, and expanded. Imagine ships docking in the harbor not with cargo, but with stacks of scrolls. Every traveler, merchant, or diplomat searched for texts to add to the growing collection. The rulers were so obsessed with completeness that they reportedly borrowed priceless manuscripts from Athens and other cities, only to send back copies while keeping the originals. This wasn't just collecting, it was a systematic, almost feverish mission to preserve every idea humanity had ever put to paper. At its peak, the library wasn't just storing scrolls, it was rewriting how knowledge worked. Scholars there didn't merely read, they debated, experimented, and pushed boundaries. Think of figures like Euclid, who laid the foundations of geometry within those walls, or Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference with astonishing accuracy, using little more than shadows and logic. The library became a melting pot where Egyptian astronomy met Greek philosophy, where medical texts from Babylon were translated and improved upon. This cross-pollination of ideas was unprecedented. No other place in the ancient world had such a deliberate, organized approach to learning, where the simple act of bringing thinkers together under one roof sparked breakthroughs that would echo for millennia. But what made Alexandria unique wasn't just its ambition, it was its methods. The Ptolemies didn't wait for knowledge to come to them. They sent agents across kingdoms offering rewards for rare texts. They employed armies of scribes to copy and catalog, creating what might have been history's first searchable archive. Some accounts even suggest they developed early forms of peer review, with scholars critiquing each other's work before it entered the collection. In many ways, this was the birth of academia as we know it, a system built not on hoarding secrets, but on sharing, testing, and refining ideas. That ethos alone could have changed the world. And for a time, it did. The numbers alone are enough to take your breath away. 400,000 scrolls, some scholars say, while others argue it may have been closer to 700,000. To put that in perspective, imagine walking into a library today and seeing shelf after shelf containing the equivalent of tens of thousands of modern books. But these weren't just any books. Each scroll represented hours of labor handwritten by scribes, often in languages few could read, capturing ideas that had taken lifetimes to develop. And here's the chilling part: many of those works existed nowhere else. There were no backups, no digital copies, no second chances. If a scroll burned, its knowledge vanished forever. Now picture what was inside. Aristotle's lost dialogues, debates, and theories we know existed because other ancients quoted them, but which may have been preserved in full within those walls. Euclid's Elements, the very foundation of geometry, was likely just one among countless mathematical treatises lining the shelves. Medical texts described surgeries and remedies so advanced that historians believe they could have leapfrogged medicine forward by centuries if they'd survived. There were star charts mapping the heavens with precision, plays that made Sophocles look like an amateur, and philosophical works questioning the nature of reality in ways that wouldn't be matched until the Enlightenment. This wasn't just a library, it was a time capsule of human brilliance, a living archive where every scroll held the potential to rewrite what we thought we knew. Consider how they built such a collection. Unlike modern libraries that wait for publishers to send books, Alexandria's rulers were relentless. They confiscated scrolls from ships docking in their harbor, copied them, and sometimes kept the originals. They sent agents across the Mediterranean with blank checks, buying or borrowing anything resembling knowledge. Even travelers weren't safe. If you passed through Alexandria with a rare text, you might leave without it. This wasn't theft. It was a manic, almost desperate drive to gather every idea under one roof, and it worked. By the library's peak, it likely housed more written knowledge than anywhere else on Earth. But that very ambition made its loss catastrophic. When the flames came, they didn't just destroy books. They erased entire disciplines, silenced voices, and left gaps in our understanding that we're still trying to fill 2,000 years later. What's haunting is how much we'll never know. For every famous name like Archimedes or Hippocrates whose works partially survived, there were dozens, maybe hundreds of thinkers whose contributions vanished entirely. Imagine an unknown philosopher whose ideas on democracy could have reshaped governments, or a physician who'd unlocked the secrets of infection millennia before germ theory. Their words are gone, leaving us with only echoes and guesses. That's the real tragedy of Alexandria. It's not just the scrolls we lost, it's the conversations that never happened, the discoveries that were never made because the foundation they might have built upon turned to ash. Within those hallowed halls, the air must have crackled with intellectual energy, not just from the scrolls lining the shelves, but from the legendary thinkers who animated them. Take Eratosthenes, a man whose curiosity knew no bounds. While others still debated whether the earth was flat, he used little more than a stick, the sun's shadow, and sheer ingenuity to calculate our planet's circumference with astonishing accuracy, missing the mark by less than 2%. His genius wasn't just in the answer he found, but in the questions he dared to ask, and he wasn't alone. The library's corridors buzzed with polymaths like Aristarchus, who theorized a heliocentric solar system nearly 2,000 years before Copernicus, and hero of Alexandria, whose mechanical inventions, from steam engines to automatic doors, read like science fiction plucked from the future. Then there was Hypatia, a name that still echoes through history, not just for her brilliance, but for the barriers she shattered. In an era when women were often excluded from intellectual life, she commanded respect as a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher, teaching in the library's shadow and refining the astrolabe, a tool that would guide sailors for centuries. Her murder by a mob in 415 CE marked more than just a personal tragedy. It symbolized the violent end of an era where reason and inquiry had flourished. But while her life was cut short, her legacy hints at something extraordinary. Alexandria's scholars weren't just working in isolation. They were part of an interconnected web of debate, where ideas from Egypt, Greece, Persia, and beyond collided and cross-pollinated. This collaborative spirit was the library's true magic. Picture Euclid drafting the elements, his foundational work on geometry, while down the hall, physicians pored over Egyptian medical texts, merging them with Greek theories. Meanwhile, astronomers like Ptolemy, whose geocentric model would dominate science for 1400 years, debated their findings over shared meals. Unlike the solitary geniuses of later centuries, these thinkers thrived on collective inquiry. They peer-reviewed each other's work, built upon failures, and celebrated discoveries as communal triumphs. In many ways, they invented the very model of modern research, proving that knowledge grows fastest when it's shared, challenged, and refined in the crucible of diverse minds. What's often overlooked is how radical this approach was for its time. Ancient knowledge was typically guarded by priests or elites, treated as secret wisdom to be hoarded. But Alexandria's scholars operated differently. They translated foreign texts into Greek, making Babylonian astronomy or Indian mathematics accessible to all. They cataloged relentlessly, creating the first known library classification system, an ancient precursor to our search engines, and they welcomed thinkers from across the known world, fostering a diversity of thought that's strikingly modern. The library wasn't just preserving humanity's knowledge, it was democratizing it, laying the groundwork for the very idea that learning belongs to everyone. Yet for all their achievements, these luminaries were just the visible peaks of a much larger intellectual mountain. For every famous name we remember, countless others, students, translators, scribes, labored in the background, copying texts, debating theories, and pushing boundaries in ways history never recorded. That's the real lesson of Alexandria's scholars. Progress isn't just the work of lone geniuses, but of ecosystems that nurture curiosity. When those conditions vanished with the library's fall, humanity didn't just lose scrolls, we lost a blueprint for how to cultivate brilliance itself. The flames that engulfed Alexandria's harbor in 48 BCE didn't just burn ships, they licked at the edges of history itself. Julius Caesar, cornered by Ptolemaic forces during his infamous siege, made a desperate gamble, setting fire to his own fleet to prevent enemy reinforcements. But the wind carried the blaze beyond the docks, swallowing buildings in its path. Some ancient accounts whisper that the fire reached the library, or at least its storage warehouses, where thousands of scrolls may have turned to smoke in moments. Imagine the smell of burning papyrus ink evaporating, centuries of thought dissolving into the air. This wasn't just an accident. It was a brutal lesson in how knowledge becomes fragile when power takes priority. What makes this moment so chilling is the uncertainty. Ancient historians like Plutarch and Seneca disagree on the scale of destruction. Some claim only 40,000 scrolls were lost, a devastating blow, but not the library's death knell. Others suggest the fire gutted entire wings, irreplaceable works vanishing before anyone could intervene. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. What's undeniable is the symbolism. Rome's greatest general, a man celebrated for his intellect, indirectly unleashing chaos on the Mediterranean's intellectual heart. Caesar himself reportedly mourned the loss, but the irony is crushing. The same ambition that drove him to conquer Egypt also endangered its greatest cultural treasure. This wasn't just about flames. The siege disrupted Alexandria's fragile ecosystem of learning. Scholars fled, funding dried up, and the library's once routine acquisitions, those vital shipments of scrolls from Athens, Rhodes, and beyond, ground to a halt. Even if the physical damage was contained, the institution never fully recovered its momentum. Think of it like a tree losing half its roots. It might stand for years, but the decline has already begun. And here's the haunting part: we'll never know exactly what burned. Maybe it was Aristotle's lost dialogues on comedy, or the original maps of Phoenician explorers. Perhaps the fire swallowed entire languages, medical cures, or astronomical observations that could have rewritten textbooks. The deeper tragedy lies in the pattern this fire set. After Caesar, the library became vulnerable in ways it never had been before. Rulers who once competed to expand its collections now saw it as a political tool, or worse, a nuisance. The Ptolemies' obsessive dedication to preservation gave way to neglect, then indifference. And as the flames of 48 BCE proved, once knowledge starts slipping away, it's nearly impossible to get it back. The fire wasn't just a disaster. It was the first crack in a dam that would eventually break entirely. The slow unraveling of Alexandria's legacy didn't come with a single explosion or a dramatic collapse. It was death by 1,000 cuts. Long after Caesar's fire, the library limped on, but the lifeblood that had sustained it, royal patronage, scholarly devotion, and an unshakable belief in the value of knowledge, began to drain away. As Rome's grip on Egypt weakened, so did its investment in preserving what was once the crown jewel of human understanding. Scrolls that had been meticulously copied and repaired now languished in damp storage rooms, their edges curling, their ink bleeding into oblivion. Imagine walking those halls in the library's twilight years, running a hand along shelves where once pristine manuscripts now crumbled at the slightest touch. This wasn't just neglect, it was the quiet suffocation of an entire era's intellectual ambition. The real tragedy of this slow decay, much of it was preventable. Ancient librarians knew how to preserve their treasures, storing scrolls in dry, cool chambers, treating parchment with cedar oil to repel insects, even employing teams of scribes whose sole job was to recopy aging texts before they became illegible. But these practices required money, manpower, and above all, a society that valued what these scrolls represented. By the 3rd century CE, Alexandria was a city fraying at the seams. Political upheaval meant budgets once earmarked for scholarship were diverted to soldiers and sieges. The scholars who had once flocked to the library now dispersed to safer harbors, taking their expertise with them. Yet material decay was only part of the story. A more insidious threat emerged: ideology. As Christianity rose to dominance across the Roman Empire, ancient knowledge became suspect. Texts on pagan rituals, Hellenistic philosophy, or even early scientific theories that contradicted religious doctrine were labeled dangerous. In 291 CE, Emperor Diocletian ordered the burning of alchemical writings, not because they were wrong, but because he feared their knowledge might empower rebels to create counterfeit gold. This marked a sinister shift. Where the Ptolemies had sought to collect every idea, now authorities actively purged them. Theophilus, Alexandria's bishop in the late 4th century, reportedly oversaw the destruction of the city's pagan temples, and likely any heretical texts within them. What's chilling is how ordinary this erasure became. Unlike the dramatic fires we remember, most of the library's losses happened invisibly. A scroll left unrepaired here, a controversial text quietly discarded there. Over decades, these small acts of indifference or intolerance stacked up like layers of dust. Some works weren't outright destroyed but simply stopped being copied, their last existing versions fading into obscurity. Think of it like a puzzle where pieces vanish one by one until the picture becomes unrecognizable. By the time Muslim armies arrived in 641 CE, an event often wrongly blamed for the library's final destruction, the great institution was already a ghost of itself. This gradual loss poses a haunting question. How much of what we consider lost actually deteriorated not in flames, but in plain sight? The philosopher Hypatia's brutal murder in 415 CE wasn't just a personal tragedy, it was a signal flare. When mobs could kill a renowned scholar in broad daylight with impunity, the message was clear. The age of reason that had built Alexandria was over. Yet even then, echoes persisted. Some scholars smuggled texts to monasteries where patient hands preserved fragments. Others fled to Baghdad, where their ideas would eventually feed the Islamic Golden Age. But the continuum had been broken. The library's greatest loss wasn't just the scrolls themselves, it was the system that nurtured them, the unbroken chain of curiosity and care that had kept knowledge alive for generations. Once that chain snapped, humanity spent centuries trying to piece it back together. What makes this erosion so unsettling is how familiar it feels. Even today, knowledge faces death by 1,000 cuts, not from fire or war, but from budget cuts, decaying infrastructure, or the slow creep of censorship. Alexandria's lesson isn't just about ancient history, it's a warning. When we stop valuing preservation, when we let ideology dictate what ideas survive, we don't just lose the past. We impoverish the future. The library didn't crumble in a day. It was betrayed by 1,000 small decisions, and that's why its ghost still haunts us. The story of Caliph Omar's supposed destruction of the library is a haunting example of how myths take root in the absence of answers. According to the legend, when Muslim forces captured Alexandria in 642 CE, the Caliph was presented with the library's vast collection and reportedly declared, "If these books agree with the Quran, we have no need of them. If they disagree, we must destroy them." The scrolls, he allegedly said, would make excellent fuel for the city's bathhouses, a symbolic act of erasure that fed the fires for months. It's a dramatic tale, one that paints a vivid villain in history's narrative. But here's the problem. Nearly all modern historians agree it never happened. The timeline alone unravels the myth. By the mid-7th century, the library had already endured centuries of decline ravaged by fires, plundered by emperors, and hollowed out by neglect. The grand institution told me the first built was likely a shadow of itself, its halls empty, its collections scattered. Contemporary accounts from the Muslim conquest don't even mention the library, focusing instead on the city's strategic importance. So why does this story persist? Because grief needs a scapegoat. The loss of Alexandria's knowledge was so catastrophic that later generations, struggling to comprehend it, crafted a narrative with clear heroes and villains. The Caliph became a convenient figure to blame, a way to make sense of a tragedy too vast to attribute to mere entropy. What's fascinating is how this myth reveals a deeper truth about humanity's relationship with knowledge. The very act of blaming Omar reflects an uncomfortable reality. We'd rather imagine a single, fiery catastrophe than confront the slow, mundane forces that truly doomed the library. Neglect isn't as cinematic as a burning scroll. Budget cuts lack the drama of a conquering army, but history rarely ends with a bang. More often, it's the quiet choices, the misplaced priorities, the withdrawn funding, the scholars who left and weren't replaced, that chip away at greatness until it collapses under its own weight. This false narrative also obscures the Muslim world's actual role in preserving ancient knowledge. While the Omar story paints Arab forces as destroyers, the opposite is true. Scholars in Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba meticulously translated surviving Greek and Egyptian texts, saving works that might otherwise have vanished entirely. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became a new Alexandria where thinkers refined algebra, revolutionized medicine, and expanded on the very ideas the library had once nurtured. The tragedy isn't that Muslim conquerors burned books, it's that they arrived too late to save what was already gone. The real lesson here isn't about who destroyed the library, but why we're so desperate to assign blame. Perhaps it's easier to mourn a single act of violence than to face the harder truth. Civilizations don't lose knowledge because of one bad actor. They lose it when they stop valuing curiosity, when they prioritize short-term power over long-term wisdom, when they let the work of preservation seem less urgent than the next war or political crisis. Alexandria didn't fall because of Omar. It fell because piece by piece the world forgot what made it precious, and that's a warning that echoes far beyond ancient history. Among the most agonizing losses from Alexandria's ashes are the works we know existed because ancient writers mention them, quote them, even praise them, but which now survive only as fragments or titles. Take Sophocles, the legendary Greek playwright. Today, we have just 7 of his estimated 120 plays. Imagine what vanished: 90% of his life's work, comedies and tragedies that Athenians once wept over, now reduced to footnotes in other authors' texts. Euripides fared no better. Only 18 of his 92 plays escaped oblivion. These weren't just stories. They were windows into the ancient soul, exploring love, war, and morality with a depth that still resonates. To lose them isn't just a literary tragedy, it's a severing of our connection to the emotional world of antiquity. Then there's Aristotle, whose surviving works alone shaped Western thought for millennia. But what about the dialogues he wrote in his youth, brilliant, playful debates that Cicero described as rivers of gold? We know their titles: On Poets, On Philosophy, even a lost work on comedy that might have redefined humor itself. These weren't dry treatises, they were living conversations, the kind that could have bridged the gap between Plato's idealism and Aristotle's later logic. Instead, they're ghosts haunting the margins of history with their absence. The scientific losses cut even deeper. Babylonian astronomers had mapped the stars with precision, predicting eclipses and planetary motions centuries before the Greeks. Their clay tablets, translated and housed in Alexandria, contained observational data stretching back generations, ancient big data that could have accelerated astronomy by lifetimes. But without those records, later scholars like Ptolemy had to rebuild cosmic understanding from scratch, often stumbling where Babylonians had already found answers. Perhaps most haunting are the gaps we can't even name. For every Aeschylus or Archimedes whose vanished works we mourn, how many unknown thinkers left no trace at all? An Egyptian physician who pioneered anesthesia, a Persian mathematician who unlocked calculus early, a Phoenician navigator who charted the Atlantic, their ideas might have lined those shelves uncredited and unremembered. The library didn't just lose famous texts, it lost the collective murmur of 1,000 voices, the hum of human curiosity that could have changed everything. Consider this: we only know about some lost works because later authors argued against them. A Christian writer angrily referencing a pagan philosopher's heretical cosmology, or a medieval scholar dismissing an ancient theory of evolution. these grudging citations are all that remain of ideas too radical for their time. It's like reconstructing a symphony from the complaints of those who hated it. The library held the originals, the unfiltered brilliance. What survived was often filtered through the biases of those who copied or chose not to. The true scale of this loss reveals itself in the puzzles left behind. Greek engineers built steam engines but never industrialized. Physicians described germs without germ theory. The pieces were there, scattered across scrolls that never intersected again. Alexandria's greatest gift might have been helping those ideas collide, something we'll never see. Every gap in our knowledge isn't just missing information. It's a road not taken, a turn in history's path that could have led somewhere extraordinary. Imagine a world where the Industrial Revolution began not in the 1700s, but in the 1st century, where steam power transformed ancient societies, where telescopes revealed the solar system's true nature centuries before Galileo, where medical breakthroughs like germ theory saved millions during the Roman Empire. This wasn't science fiction. It was within humanity's grasp, hidden in the scrolls of Alexandria. The loss of those texts didn't just erase knowledge, it fractured our scientific trajectory, forcing generations to rediscover what had already been known. Take Aristarchus of Samos, a mind so ahead of his time that his ideas bordered on heresy. In the 3rd century BCE, while most scholars still pictured Earth as the universe's fixed center, he proposed something revolutionary. The sun, not our planet, was the anchor around which everything revolved. His calculations, preserved in Alexandria, used geometry and meticulous observations to argue for heliocentrism, a concept that wouldn't gain acceptance until Copernicus in the 1500s. But here's the gut punch. We only know about Aristarchus' theory because Archimedes mentioned it in passing. The original work, likely detailed in a scroll now lost to fire or decay, vanished entirely. Without that disappearance, astronomy might have leaped forward 1800 years earlier, sparing scientists like Galileo the persecution they faced for defending an idea the ancient world had already proven. Then there's Hero of Alexandria, the closest thing antiquity had to a steampunk visionary. In the 1st century CE, he designed an eolipile, a spinning sphere powered by steam. That could have been the seed of an industrial revolution. His manuscripts described not just toys but practical applications, automatic temple doors, primitive programmable carts, even a coin-operated vending machine. These weren't theoretical musings, they were blueprints. Yet without the library's vast engineering archives to contextualize and expand his work, Hero's inventions became curiosities rather than catalysts. By the time James Watt refined the steam engine in the 1700s, humanity had spent 17 centuries reinventing the wheel, literally. The setbacks weren't limited to physics and engineering. Medical knowledge suffered equally devastating blows. The library housed texts from the School of Alexandria, where physicians like Herophilus pioneered human dissection, identifying nerves and distinguishing arteries from veins. Their work suggested concepts like blood circulation ideas that wouldn't resurface until William Harvey in the 1600s. Even more striking, some scrolls reportedly described antiseptics and anesthesia, with recipes for pain-numbing potions using opium or mandrake root. Had these techniques spread, surgeries might have evolved from brutal, last-resort ordeals into precise, routine procedures millennia earlier. Instead, their disappearance consigned patients to centuries of unnecessary suffering. What's often overlooked is how these losses created domino effects. When Hero's steam engines were forgotten, so too was the metallurgy needed to build them at scale. Without Aristarchus' heliocentric model, navigators kept relying on flawed star charts, slowing exploration. Even mathematics suffered. Archimedes' treatises on infinity and calculus, partially preserved in palimpsests, suggest he was on the verge of breakthroughs that took Newton and Leibniz 2,000 years to replicate. Each vanished scroll didn't just represent a single idea lost. It meant the countless future ideas it might have inspired never came to be. The cruelest irony. Many rediscovered breakthroughs weren't new at all, just forgotten. When Renaissance scholars pored over surviving fragments of Alexandria's legacy, they often found their innovations were ancient knowledge repackaged. The printing press, for instance, built on principles of mass production the library scribes had perfected for copying scrolls. Even Copernicus likely knew of Aristarchus' work through secondary sources, though he never acknowledged it. This cycle of loss and rediscovery wasn't just inefficient. It meant humanity spent centuries solving problems that had already been cracked, wasting time and talent that could have pushed civilization forward. The lesson here isn't just about mourning what was lost. It's about recognizing how fragile progress truly is. One generation's common knowledge becomes the next buried secret unless actively preserved and shared. Alexandria's greatest tragedy wasn't the burning of parchment, it was the severing of a chain, the breaking of a conversation that had spanned centuries. Every time we dismiss libraries as relics or cut funding for archives, we risk repeating history's greatest mistake, underestimating how much the future needs the past. The true cost of Alexandria's destruction isn't just measured in vanished inventions or scientific setbacks, it's etched into the very foundations of how we think. Ancient philosophy wasn't some ivory tower exercise. It was the operating system of civilizations, shaping everything from courtroom rhetoric to the rights of citizens. The library didn't just house famous names like Plato and Aristotle, it preserved a chorus of lesser-known voices whose ideas could have redirected history. Take Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism. Today we know his philosophy through second-hand accounts and fragments, but his original writings lost in Alexandria's ashes might have contained nuances that transform modern psychology. Imagine therapists drawing not just from Freud or Jung, but from complete Stoic texts on resilience and mindfulness, their wisdom unbroken by 2,000 years of guesswork. Then there's Hypatia, one of antiquity's most radical thinkers. In a world where women were often barred from intellectual life, she lived by cynic philosophy, rejecting wealth, gender norms, even clothing conventions, while debating men as equals. Her lost treatises on autonomy and equality might have reshaped feminism centuries before Mary Wollstonecraft. Instead, we're left with anecdotes, stories of her shaming philosophers who dismissed her, or her marriage contract demanding shared poverty with her husband. These fragments hint at a mind that challenged hierarchies in ways we're still catching up to. What else did she argue that we'll never know? The void extends beyond individuals. Entire schools of thought evaporated when the library burned. The Cyrenaics, who prioritized present happiness over future rewards, left behind only caricatures of their hedonism, likely distorted by rivals. What if their original texts had survived, offering alternatives to today's grind culture? Or the skeptics, whose rigorous questioning of dogma could have inoculated societies against absolutism. Their complete works might have given us tools to navigate misinformation crises or political polarization with clearer eyes. Even more unsettling are the gaps we don't know to miss. For every named philosopher whose legacy was truncated, countless others, women, slaves, foreigners, left no trace at all. A Syrian merchant's treatise on tolerance, an Egyptian priest's meditations on justice, a Thracian poet's vision of democracy. These voices didn't just disappear, they were erased from the conversation before it could begin. The library was supposed to be their megaphone, amplifying ideas across centuries. Without it, humanity's moral evolution didn't just slow, it narrowed, leaving us with a monoculture of thought where diversity might have flourished. Consider how differently modern ethics might look if Alexandria's full spectrum of ideas had survived. Debates on free will, artificial intelligence, or bioethics could be drawing from 2,000 additional years of nuanced argument. Legal systems might balance Plato's idealism with lost theories of restorative justice. Education could incorporate forgotten pedagogies that made learning visceral rather than rote. The library's philosophical losses aren't just academic, they're roadmaps to better versions of ourselves that we'll never get to follow. What makes this loss so haunting is its invisibility. We don't mourn what we can't imagine, but every time we hit the limits of our political imagination or struggle to articulate new moral frameworks, we're dancing around absences, spaces where scrolls once held answers we're still groping for. The fire didn't just burn parchment, it burned potential futures, leaving us to rebuild civilization with half the blueprints. Buried within Alexandria's scrolls were medical insights so advanced they border on the miraculous. The Egyptians, for instance, had perfected surgical techniques for brain injuries. Skulls from antiquity show precise trepanation holes, evidence of operations where patients survived and healed. These weren't crude experiments, they were refined procedures, likely documented in texts like the lost Book of Thoth, which Greek historians called a masterwork of anatomy and healing. But here's what stings: we only know fragments. A single surviving papyrus from around 1600 BCE details suturing wounds with honey-soaked linen to prevent infection, a method modern studies confirm fights bacteria. Imagine what else vanished: entire pharmacopoeias of herbal remedies, pain management techniques, even early understandings of germ theory hinted at in Egyptian texts warning against invisible pests in contaminated water. The library's Indian medical scrolls were just as groundbreaking. Charaka and Sushruta, pioneers of Ayurveda, described surgeries for cataracts, cesarean sections, and even plastic reconstruction of noses procedures Europe wouldn't attempt for another 2,000 years. Their texts reportedly filled entire sections of Alexandria's shelves, detailing over 300 surgical instruments and 200 herbal compounds. Yet only fragments survived the library's collapse, leaving later physicians to rediscover techniques the ancient world had already mastered. The irony is crushing. Renaissance surgeons struggling with septic operating rooms might have avoided centuries of fatal infections had they accessed Alexandria's treatises on sterilization with turmeric and neem. But the most haunting losses are the treatments for ailments we still battle today. Galen, the Roman physician whose flawed theories dominated medicine until the Renaissance, admitted his work was dwarfed by Alexandrian texts on neurology and cardiology. One scroll, mentioned by a Byzantine scholar, allegedly described a plant extract that could calm the maddening humors, a possible ancient antidepressant or antipsychotic. Another, cited in Arabic commentaries, detailed a compound for dissolving bladder stones painlessly, a procedure that remained lethally risky until the 19th century. These weren't just recipes, they were the culmination of observational science across civilizations, tested and refined through generations. Their disappearance didn't just set medicine back, it erased pathways to healing we're still struggling to rebuild. Consider the cost in human terms. When the bubonic plague ravaged Constantinople in 542 CE, doctors had no access to Alexandria's scrolls on epidemic containment, which reportedly included quarantine protocols and immune-boosting tonics. During the Crusades, battlefield surgeons bled patients to balance humors, unaware that Alexandrian texts had long debunked the practice. Even childbirth, perilous well into the modern era, might have been safer had midwives retained the library's detailed scrolls on fetal positioning and herbal pain relief. Every rediscovery, like the recent finding that ancient Egyptian honey dressings outperform some antibiotics, is a reminder of how much was squandered. The cruelest twist, some survivors hint at what we lost. A 9th century Arabic text describes finding a water-damaged Alexandrian scroll on diagnosing tumors through pulse readings, a method now being explored in modern oncology. A monastic manuscript mentions a Greek physician's lost work on the thread-like vessels of the heart, possibly describing capillaries centuries before microscopes. These fragments suggest the library held not just knowledge, but paradigms' entire frameworks for understanding the body that could have spared millions from suffering. Medicine didn't just lose data that day, it lost a head start. Imagine walking into the Library of Alexandria and pulling a scroll at random from its shelves, not a scientific treatise or philosophical argument, but a poem so vivid it makes your heart ache, a comedy so sharp the ink feels fresh with laughter centuries later. This was the human pulse of the collection, works that didn't just inform minds but stirred souls. Sappho's lyrics, for instance, weren't merely verses. They were intimate whispers across time, fragments of desire and longing that still resonate. Ancient writers called her the 10th muse, and Plato claimed her words made his hair stand on end. Yet today, we have only one complete poem from her. Just 700 lines survive from an estimated 9 volumes. The rest ashes. Each lost line isn't a missing puzzle piece. It's a silenced voice that once sang of love, jealousy, and the moon's silver light over the Aegean. Then there's Menander, the comic genius whose plays defined humor for the ancient world. His wit was so legendary that when archaeologists unearthed a single complete comedy in the 19th century, scholars wept not just at its brilliance, but at the realization of how much had vanished. Think of Shakespeare's influence, then multiply it across generations. Menander's timing, his razor-sharp observations of human folly, became the blueprint for humor from Rome to Byzantium. Yet of his over 100 plays, only one survives intact. The rest are ghosts quoted in other texts, referenced with reverence but forever out of reach. What jokes, what truths about human nature died with them? The losses extend beyond individual artists. Entire genres evaporated. Take the Greek epic cycle, not just Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, but the sprawling sagas that came before and after them. Poems like the Cypria, which told of the Trojan War's origins, or the Nostoi, chronicling the hero's harrowing journeys home, survive only in summaries by later writers. These weren't just stories, they were the ancient equivalent of cinematic universes, weaving together myths, morals, and collective memory. Without them, our understanding of Greek culture is like watching a film with every other scene cut out. Even history itself became fragmentary. The library housed eyewitness accounts of Alexander the Great's campaigns by his generals, detailed chronicles of Egyptian pharaohs written by priests, and Persian royal archives captured as spoils of war. These weren't dry records, they were narratives alive with ambition, betrayal, and spectacle. The Babylonian historian Berossus, for example, compiled 3 millennia of Mesopotamian history into volumes for the Ptolemies. Today, only scattered quotes remain, like finding a single page from a 1,000-volume encyclopedia. What makes these literary losses especially cruel is how personal they feel. Scientific texts might be rediscovered or reinvented, but a poem once gone can never be recreated. That unique alchemy of language, rhythm, and emotion dies with its author. When Callimachus, the library's own librarian, penned his elegy for a friend, "Tell me, stone, who rests beneath you," he couldn't have known most of his own work would one day need the same epitaph. The true tragedy isn't just the silence where Sappho's songs or Menander's wit once lived, it's the conversations they could have sparked across time. Imagine Dante reading a complete Greek epic cycle, or Shakespeare riffing on Menander's comedies. Think of modern poets drawing from intact volumes of Sappho instead of piecing together papyrus scraps. Literature isn't just art, it's a conversation stretching back millennia. The library's flames didn't just burn parchment, they severed a thread in the loom of human expression, leaving our cultural tapestry forever unfinished. The voices of Berossus and Manetho should have been our guides through the fog of ancient history first, and witnesses to civilizations that shaped the world. Berossus, a Babylonian priest writing in Greek, didn't just chronicle kings and battles. He preserved his people's origin myths, astronomical records, even the flood story that predated Noah by millennia. His 3-volume Babylonica was a masterpiece, weaving together temple archives and oral traditions into a coherent narrative. Today, only scattered quotes survive, like finding a single torn page from an epic novel. Imagine what we've lost: his detailed account of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, or the precise rituals of Ishtar's temple, now reduced to footnotes in other historians' works. Manetho's fate is just as heartbreaking. As an Egyptian priest under the Ptolemies, he had access to records we can only dream of, king lists stretching back to the mythical First Dynasty, first-hand descriptions of pyramid construction, even medical texts from the Old Kingdom. His Egyptiocha wasn't just history, it was a bridge between Egypt's fading glory and the Greek world eager to understand it. But the library's collapse left us with fragments, names of pharaohs without context, tantalizing references to the Hyksos invasion or the wrath of Sekhmet stripped of their stories. What secrets died with his full scrolls? The recipe for the mortar that held Giza's blocks together, the true purpose of the Dendera light reliefs, the court intrigues behind Akhenaten's religious revolution. These weren't dry chroniclers. Berossus wrote with the flair of a storyteller, describing the hanging gardens in such vivid detail that later historians questioned whether he'd seen them himself. Manetho's account of Cleopatra's ancestors pulsed with insider knowledge, temple gossip, royal scandals, the unvarnished truth behind polished stone carvings. Their works were living history, not the sanitized versions carved on monuments. Without them, we're left guessing. Take Hammurabi's code, we have the laws, but what of the debates behind them? Manetho might have preserved the speeches of viziers arguing justice versus order. Berossus could have explained how Babylonian judges applied those laws in practice. Instead, we're left with cold stone and speculation. The cruelest irony, these historians knew they were writing for posterity. Berossus dedicated his work to Antiochus I, pleading for Greeks to respect Babylon's legacy. Manetho structured his history as a rebuttal to Herodotus' exoticized tales of Egypt. They weren't just recording facts, they were fighting for their culture's rightful place in history's narrative. And they lost. The library's collapse didn't just erase their words, it tilted the historical record toward the Mediterranean, leaving Mesopotamia and Egypt as footnotes in someone else's story. What's truly haunting are the gaps we don't even know to mourn. For every Berossus whose name survived, how many anonymous scribes wrote histories that vanished entirely? A Sumerian priest's diary from Ur's final days, a merchant's account of the Indus Valley trade routes. These voices didn't just disappear, they were erased from the conversation before it began. The library was supposed to be their megaphone, amplifying marginalized perspectives across centuries. Without it, history became a monologue where we've forgotten half the speakers. This isn't just about missing facts. It's about losing the texture of ancient lives, the smells of Babylon's spice markets at dusk, the sound of scribes chanting in Memphis scriptoriums, the jokes shared by laborers building the pyramids. Berossus and Manetho didn't just write history, they preserved humanity, and in their absence, the past feels less like a lived experience and more like a puzzle with half the pieces gone. The true tragedy of Alexandria's linguistic losses isn't just about the texts that burned, it's about the voices they could have helped us hear. Picture a room in the library where scribes meticulously compared Egyptian hieroglyphs with Greek translations, where Aramaic merchants' records sat side by side with Sanskrit poetry. These weren't just books, they were bridges between worlds, dictionaries for civilizations that would one day fall silent. When the flames took them, they didn't just destroy words, they severed connections, leaving future scholars to grope in the dark for meanings that had once been meticulously preserved. Consider the Rosetta Stone, that famous slab that finally cracked the code of hieroglyphs in the 19th century. Now imagine if the library had survived, how many more Rosetta Stones might have lined its shelves. Bilingual scrolls pairing Phoenician with Greek or Sumerian with Akkadian could have unlocked scripts that still baffle us today. The Etruscan language, for instance, left behind thousands of inscriptions, but without a bilingual key, their meanings remain just out of reach. Alexandria likely held the missing pieces, merchant logs, treaties, or literary works that translated Etruscan into Greek. Instead, we're left with a linguistic jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are gone. The ripple effects are staggering. Take Linear A, the script of the ancient Minoans. For over a century, scholars have strained to decipher it, knowing it could reveal secrets of Europe's first advanced civilization. But without a bilingual reference, exactly the kind of text Alexandria specialized in, progress crawls at a snail's pace. The same goes for the Indus Valley script, a 4,000-year-old mystery etched into seals and tablets. Had the library preserved a single merchant's ledger comparing Indus symbols to known languages, entire chapters of South Asian history might now be open to us. Even languages we can read suffered from this loss. The nuances of ancient Egyptian Demotic, the everyday script used for contracts and letters, are still debated because the library's vast archives of legal documents and personal correspondence turned to ash. Without those everyday texts, we're left with monumental inscriptions and tomb carvings, as if future historians tried to reconstruct 21st century English using only billboards and gravestones. The humanity of these cultures, their jokes, grocery lists, love letters vanished with the library's mundane but priceless records. Perhaps the cruelest twist is how close we came. Ancient librarians like Callimachus had already begun cataloging texts by language and subject, creating the first known system for cross-referencing translations. Had that work continued, we might have had a master key to the ancient world's voices. Instead, the burning of Alexandria didn't just rob us of knowledge, it stole the very tools we needed to recover it. Every untranslated tablet sitting mute in a museum today isn't just a puzzle, it's a ghost whispering in a language we may never learn to hear. The flames that consumed Alexandria's great library didn't erase its legacy entirely, they scattered it like embers carried on the wind. While the physical structure crumbled, fragments of its knowledge found refuge in the minds and satchels of fleeing scholars, who became unwitting guardians of humanity's collective memory. Picture these travelers, philosophers clutching precious scrolls, physicians smuggling medical texts, astronomers memorizing star charts dispersing across deserts and seas to places like Baghdad, Constantinople, and the monasteries of Europe. These refugees didn't just save books, they preserved the very DNA of intellectual progress, ensuring that even in ruin, the library's spirit refused to die. Consider Baghdad's House of Wisdom, where 9th century scholars pored over Greek texts translated into Arabic, many of which traced their lineage back to Alexandria's shells. Works by Euclid, Galen, and Ptolemy survived not because they were spared from flames, but because scribes in Syria and Persia meticulously copied them, sometimes adding layers of commentary that enriched the originals. The same geometric theorems that once echoed in Alexandria's halls now fueled breakthroughs in Islamic mathematics, with scholars like Al-Khwarizmi Ismi refining algebra using tools the ancient library had preserved. This wasn't just preservation, it was reinvention, proving that ideas could outlast the institutions that birthed them. Yet survival came at a cost. The dispersal meant no single place would ever again hold the world's knowledge so completely. Imagine a puzzle where the pieces are scattered across continents, some lost forever, others faded with time. A medical text might surface in a Persian manuscript, while its companion volume on surgical techniques turned up centuries later in a Byzantine monastery. Legal codes from Rome survived, but the philosophical debates that contextualized them vanished. This fragmentation reshaped how humanity understood its own past, leaving gaps that bred myths and misunderstandings. Without Alexandria's centralized archive, scholars spent centuries piecing together half-remembered truths, like trying to reconstruct a symphony from a handful of disjointed notes. The most poignant survival stories are the ones that hinge on sheer luck. Take Aristotle's Poetics, which influenced literary theory for millennia. We owe its existence to a single copy that escaped Alexandria, possibly tucked into a scholar's belongings as he fled political unrest. Contrast that with the fate of his dialogues' playful, accessible works that shaped Cicero's thinking but vanished when no one made duplicates in time. The difference between what endured and what perished often came down to the whims of chance, the personal interests of a scribe, or even the durability of parchment in one climate over another. What's often overlooked is how this scattering altered the ideas themselves. Texts translated from Greek to Syriac to Arabic and back to Latin accumulated subtle shifts, a mistranslated term here, an interpretive gloss there, until the original meaning blurred. Euclid's geometry remained largely intact, but philosophical works, reliant on nuance, sometimes morphed into unrecognizable forms. Imagine a game of telephone spanning centuries, where each whisper reshapes the message. That's how Plato's Republic reached medieval Europe, filtered through multiple languages and cultural lenses, its radical edges softened by generations of intermediaries. The library's indirect survival holds a paradoxical lesson. Knowledge is both fragile and resilient. A single fire could erase centuries of thought, yet a handful of determined individuals could keep embers alive across millennia. Today, when we digitize ancient manuscripts or back up data in the cloud, we're grappling with the same challenge Alexandria's heirs faced: how to preserve truth without letting it become fragmented or diluted. The library's physical form is gone, but its ghost lingers in every archive, every server farm, every effort to ensure that tomorrow's scholars won't have to piece together our world from scattered fragments. We're living through what historians call the digital dark age, a paradox where we produce more information than ever, yet lose it faster than ever before. Think about the last time you tried to open an old file only to find the format corrupted, or clicked a link to a vanished web page. Unlike the slow decay of papyrus, digital data can blink out of existence in milliseconds, leaving no ash, no fragments, just silence. The irony is crushing. In an era of cloud storage and endless backups, our knowledge might be more vulnerable than the scrolls of Alexandria. At least their librarians knew fire was the enemy. Ours a software update, a forgotten password, or a company going bankrupt could erase centuries of human thought in the time it takes to reboot a server. Consider the fate of early internet culture. GeoCities, the vibrant playground of 90s web creativity, hosted millions of personal pages, digital diaries, fan art, niche communities. When it shut down in 2009, nearly all of it vanished overnight. Or take Flash animations, once the lifeblood of online humor and storytelling. When Adobe discontinued support in 2020, decades of interactive art became unplayable relics. These weren't just files, they were the voices of a generation, as irreplaceable as Sappho's lost poems. The difference, Alexandria's losses were accidental. Ours are often decisions corporate or bureaucratic, made without considering what future historians might need. The fragility goes deeper than deleted files. Digital formats themselves have shockingly short lifespans. The floppy disks of the 1980s are already unreadable to most modern devices. The CDs we burned in the early 2000s are succumbing to disk rot, their aluminum layers degrading into oblivion. Even today's cutting-edge storage solid-state drives, cloud servers have hidden vulnerabilities. Hard drives last 3 to 5 years on average. Magnetic tapes, used for archiving everything from scientific data to film masters, degrade within decades. Compare that to the Dead Sea Scrolls, which survived 2,000 years in caves because someone chose durable parchment and sealed them in clay jars. Our ancestors built pyramids. We're storing civilization's memory on devices with planned obsolescence. What makes this crisis uniquely modern is its invisibility. When a library burns, the loss is visceral smoke in the sky, charred pages underfoot. But when a server farm fails or a format becomes unreadable, there's no drama, no collective mourning. Data vanishes silently, leaving no void we can measure. The Library of Congress estimates that nearly 80% of early internet content is already gone. How much of today's digital landscape will survive to 2100? The tweets shaping political movements, the peer-reviewed studies published only online, the indie games pushing artistic boundaries without deliberate preservation. They're one economic downturn or platform migration away from extinction. Alexandria's greatest lesson wasn't about fire, it was about neglect. The library didn't fall in a day, it faded through centuries of misplaced priorities. We're repeating that mistake with our terabytes of data, trusting corporations to safeguard what should belong to humanity. Projects like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or GitHub's Arctic Code Vault are modern-day equivalents of scribes copying scrolls, racing against entropy. But preservation can't be left to volunteers and nonprofits. If we've learned anything from the ashes of Alexandria, it's that knowledge survives only when societies commit to its defense not as an afterthought, but as a sacred duty. The digital dark age isn't inevitable, but averting it will require something ancient librarians understood, that civilization's memory must be actively fought for every single day. Rebuilding the Library of Alexandria wasn't just an architectural project, it was an act of defiance against time itself. In 2002, rising like a phoenix from the same shores where its ancient predecessor once stood, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina opened its doors as a bold declaration. Humanity refuses to let its brightest ideas fade without a fight. This modern marvel isn't a replica it couldn't be. Instead, it's a shimmering disk of granite and glass, tilted toward the Mediterranean as if reaching to catch the sunlight of a new era. Designed by Norwegian architects, its colossal circular form echoes the cyclical nature of knowledge lost, rediscovered, and reinvented across generations. But what truly sets this library apart isn't its striking silhouette or its vast reading rooms. It's the invisible backbone of digital preservation humming beneath its floors. While the ancient library relied on papyrus vulnerable to flame, its successor stores petabytes of data across mirrored servers and climate-controlled vaults. The irony is poetic. Where fire once erased, technology now duplicates endlessly. The library's mission includes digitizing rare manuscripts from across Africa and the Middle East, creating backups so thorough that even if disaster struck again, the words would survive in clouds, hard drives, and encoded DNA storage experiments pushing the boundaries of archival science. Yet for all its futuristic safeguards, the Bibliotheca Alexandrina remains deeply rooted in tradition. Its shelves hold facsimiles of the very texts that once filled the ancient library, from Euclid's geometric proofs to fragments of Sappho's poetry, alongside contemporary works in dozens of languages. The message is clear: preservation isn't just about saving the past, it's about weaving it into an unbroken conversation with the present. Scholars here don't just study history, they add to it, contributing to a living archive where medieval Arabic medical texts might inspire tomorrow's cancer researchers. The library's most revolutionary feature might be its refusal to hoard knowledge as the Ptolemies once did. Unlike its predecessor, which amassed scrolls through confiscation, the modern institution thrives on collaboration. Its digital collections are accessible worldwide, its restoration labs share techniques openly, and its conferences bring together experts from conflicting nations to safeguard shared heritage. This ethos turns the ancient library's greatest weakness, centralization, into strength through dispersal. When Egypt's revolution in 2011 threatened the building, librarians activated emergency protocols to back up collections across 3 continents within hours. The lesson: knowledge survives when it's shared, not locked away. Walking through its sunlit atriums today, you'll find echoes of the past reimagined for a fragile digital age. A colossal statue of Ptolemy I stands guard near a wall inscribed with every known alphabet from hieroglyphs to emoji. Reading carols equipped with augmented reality screens allow visitors to unroll digital versions of carbonized Herculaneum scrolls too delicate to physically open. Even the library's art installations whisper of resilience. A sculpture titled "The Brain of the World" pulses with fiber optic neurons, symbolizing how ideas connect across time and space. The Bibliotheca Alexandrina can't undo the loss of 700,000 scrolls, but its very existence is a promise, one written not in ink or stone, but in the daily acts of librarians painstakingly digitizing crumbling manuscripts, programmers developing AI to reconstruct fragmented texts, and students from across the globe gathering to debate under its soaring roof. It stands as proof that while knowledge can be fragile, the human drive to preserve it is indestructible. The ancient library's ghost isn't just remembered here, it's put to work, reminding us that every scroll saved, every idea shared, is a victory over oblivion. The Ptolemies' obsession with collecting knowledge crossed a line from passion into something darker, a hunger so intense it justified theft. Imagine being a merchant in the ancient Mediterranean, your ship boarded by royal agents who rifle through your cargo not for gold or spices, but for scrolls. Even diplomatic envoys weren't safe. Athens reportedly lent priceless manuscripts to Alexandria's rulers, only to receive cheap copies in return while the originals stayed locked away. This wasn't preservation, it was intellectual imperialism, a stark reminder that the pursuit of knowledge can twist into control when power gets involved. The irony is bitter. A library meant to democratize learning became a monument to elitism, its treasures accessible only to those the Ptolemies deemed worthy. Fast forward to today, and the same tensions play out in boardrooms instead of harbors. academic publishers charge universities exorbitant fees for journal subscriptions, locking groundbreaking research behind paywalls while the scientists who wrote it see no profit. A single article can cost $40 to read more than many hourly wages, effectively fencing off discoveries that could cure diseases or combat climate change. The parallels are unsettling. Just as Alexandria's scribes copied scrolls but hoarded originals, modern publishers digitize knowledge but restrict access to those who can pay. Knowledge hasn't been lost this time, it's been monetized, turned into a commodity rather than a commons. Yet the stakes are even higher now. Ancient scrolls held finite information, but today's paywalls gatekeep exponentially expanding fields like AI and genomics. When a corporation patents genetic code or an algorithm, it's not just withholding data. It's potentially delaying medical breakthroughs or stifling innovation that could uplift millions. The Human Genome Project, notably released as open source, sparked a biotechnology revolution precisely because it rejected the Alexandria model of hoarding. Its success proves that sharing knowledge doesn't diminish its value, it multiplies it, creating ripple effects no single institution could achieve alone. The ethical dilemma cuts deeper than access. Who decides what knowledge is preserved in the first place? The Ptolemies prioritized Greek texts over Egyptian. Christian scribes later cherry-picked works aligning with doctrine, and modern algorithms amplify content that drives engagement rather than truth. Every act of curation is also an act of exclusion, whether it's a medieval monk discarding pagan astronomy or a social media platform burying dissenting research. Alexandria's ruins remind us that when knowledge is concentrated in the hands of a few, entire perspectives can vanish overnight, not just from shelves but from history itself. There's a hopeful counterpoint, though. Across the globe, initiatives like the Internet Archive and open access journals are hacking apart the digital paywalls, creating a new library of Alexandria without borders or gatekeepers. Scientists are increasingly publishing in free repositories like Arxiv, while educators share textbooks under Creative Commons licenses. Even ancient scrolls, once jealously guarded, are now being scanned and released online by projects like the Sinai palimpsest. This movement understands what the Ptolemies forgot. Knowledge isn't a treasure to be buried. It's a flame brighter when passed from hand to hand, capable of lighting countless torches without ever dimming. The lesson isn't that collecting knowledge is wrong. It's that collecting without sharing defeats its purpose. Alexandria's greatest failure wasn't the fire, it was the system that made its treasures vulnerable by keeping them confined. Today, as we wrestle with copyright lawsuits and data monopolies, the library's ghost whispers a warning. Civilization advances when ideas circulate, not when they're stockpiled like gold. The next chapter of human progress won't be written in vaults or behind paywalls, but in the open air where everyone can read it and add their own words. The Library of Alexandria didn't just depend on scholars, it relied on the whims of kings. Ptolemy I poured gold into its halls, seeing knowledge as a crown jewel of his empire, but later rulers treated it as an afterthought. The difference between flourishing and ruin came down to a simple question. Did those in power see ideas as assets or threats? History shows this pattern isn't unique. When Spanish bishops burned Mayan codices in the 16th century, they weren't just destroying books, they were erasing a civilization's memory to solidify control. The same impulse drove the Soviet Union's censorship of genetics research or China's systematic rewriting of Tibetan history. Power has always understood that knowledge, left unchecked, can undermine its grip. What's chilling is how ordinary these acts of erasure often seem in the moment. Theophilus, the bishop who ordered Alexandria's pagan temples destroyed in the 4th century, likely saw himself as purging heresy, not extinguishing irreplaceable texts. Centuries later, the Taliban dynamiting the Bamiyan Buddhas or ISIS looting Mosul's libraries framed their vandalism as righteous zeal. The common thread isn't malice, it's the conviction that some truths are too dangerous to preserve. Even democracies aren't immune. The McCarthy era saw U.S. officials purge subversive books from overseas libraries, while Hungary's current government scrubs LGBTQ content from school curricula. The methods change, but the calculus remains. Knowledge is power, and controlling it means controlling the future. Yet the inverse is equally revealing. The Abbasid caliphs who built Baghdad's House of Wisdom in the 8th century, or the Medici family bankrolling Renaissance Florence's libraries, proved that when rulers invest in preservation, civilizations leap forward. These weren't altruistic acts, they were strategic. The Medici knew that housing Greek manuscripts would attract scholars, elevating their city's prestige. The Abbasids understood that translating Persian, Indian, and Greek texts into Arabic would fuel innovation, giving their empire an intellectual edge. The lesson: knowledge thrives when aligned with a leader's self-interest, but therein lies the vulnerability. When political winds shift, so does funding. The Library of Alexandria's decline began not with flames, but with budget cuts. Ptolemy VIII slashing stipends for scholars to fund his wars. Modern preservation faces eerily similar pitfalls. Governments defund national archives to redirect money to flashier projects. Corporations lock research behind paywalls, prioritizing profit over access. Even digitization, often hailed as the ultimate safeguard, relies on servers vulnerable to shutdowns, hackers, or simple neglect. The irony is painful. We've built more libraries than ever, but their foundations rest on political and economic quicksand. Wikipedia's near collapse during funding shortages, or Twitter's abrupt erasure of decades of discourse under new ownership, prove how fragile our digital Alexandria really is. The solution isn't just more storage, it's decentralization. When the ancient library burned, its greatest losses were the works that existed nowhere else. Today, projects like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine or blockchain-based preservation networks mimic nature's survival strategy: redundancy. By scattering copies across borders and systems, we make knowledge harder to silence. Norway's Arctic World Archive, storing global data in a decommissioned mine on Svalbard, takes this further, burying civilizations' backups where not even war or climate change can easily reach them. Ultimately, Alexandria's ghost whispers a warning: no institution, no matter how grand, is permanent. The only real safeguard is a culture that values preservation as much as innovation, one where citizens demand access, where teachers pass on the habit of stewardship, where every smartphone becomes a potential archive. The next great library won't be a building. It'll be the sum of our choices, day after day, to remember what others might prefer forgotten. The story of Alexandria's lost library is more than a historical tragedy. It's a mirror reflecting our own precarious relationship with cultural memory. Think about how quickly civilizations can misplace their own brilliance. The ancient Egyptians built pyramids with mathematical precision, yet within centuries, their descendants forgot the techniques. The Romans engineered aqueducts that still stand, but medieval Europe lost the knowledge to maintain them. These aren't isolated accidents, they're symptoms of a pattern. Knowledge, no matter how groundbreaking, is only as durable as the systems protecting it. Alexandria's fate underscores a terrifying truth. Without constant vigilance, even the most advanced societies can slide into collective amnesia. Consider how much of our modern world relies on fragile digital archives. A single solar flare could wipe out servers holding everything from medical research to financial records. Unlike physical scrolls, digital data lacks the stubbornness of parchment. It can vanish with the click of a button. Governments rewrite Wikipedia entries during political crises. Social media algorithms bury factual reporting under sensational lies. The mechanisms differ, but the underlying vulnerability remains the same. Just as Alexandria's scholars assumed their scrolls were safe behind marble walls, we trust cloud storage and backup drives without realizing how easily both can fail. The real danger isn't just losing information, it's losing context. Imagine a future where someone finds a fragment of today's internet without understanding hyperlinks or memes. That's what happened after Alexandria fell. Later scholars stumbled upon quotes from lost works, but without the full texts, they misattributed ideas or missed nuances. Aristotle's lost dialogues on comedy might have reshaped humor theory, but all we have are second-hand summaries filtered through rivals' biases. Today, we face similar distortions. A viral clip stripped of its original broadcast, a scientific study misrepresented in headlines. These are modern versions of the fragmentation that plagues ancient history. What makes Alexandria's lesson urgent is the weaponization of forgetting. Authoritarian regimes don't just censor, they flood the zone with misinformation, muddying the waters until no one knows what's true. The library's fate shows this isn't new. When Christian mobs targeted pagan texts in late antiquity, they weren't merely destroying scrolls, they were rewriting the narrative of what counted as legitimate knowledge. Today, when schools ban books or platforms suppress dissenting research, the playbook is eerily familiar. The goal isn't just to remove ideas, but to collapse the very framework for evaluating truth. Yet there's hope in how we respond. After the fire, surviving scholars didn't surrender. They scattered, carrying fragments to monasteries, Baghdad, and Byzantium. Their determination created a decentralized web of knowledge that no single disaster could erase. Modern projects like the Internet Archive or blockchain-based libraries are doing the same, ensuring no government or corporation can monopolize truth. The real legacy of Alexandria isn't despair over what was lost, but inspiration for how to defend what remains. Every time we fact-check a viral lie, preserve a dying language, or challenge historical revisionism, we're rebuilding the library, not in stone, but in collective consciousness. The flames that consumed Alexandria didn't just burn parchment, they exposed a flaw in how we value knowledge. We treat libraries and databases as repositories, not living ecosystems requiring constant care. But cultural memory isn't a vault, it's a garden. Leave it untended, and weeds of misinformation choke out truth. The library's ghost reminds us that preservation isn't passive. It demands active participation, questioning, verifying, and above all, remembering that every scroll saved is a future reclaimed. Buried under volcanic ash for nearly 2,000 years, the scrolls of Herculaneum represent one of history's most tantalizing second chances. When Mount Vesuvius erupted in 79 CE, its pyroclastic surge didn't just preserve these texts, it carbonized them, turning entire libraries into what looked like lumps of charcoal. For centuries, scholars assumed these blackened cylinders were beyond saving, but today, advanced imaging techniques are performing what amounts to archaeological resurrection. High-resolution CT scanners can now virtually unroll these fragile relics, revealing layers of ink invisible to the naked eye. One recently decoded scroll contained previously unknown philosophical arguments by Philodmus, a thinker whose works were likely studied in Alexandria itself. The implications are staggering. If a single villa near Pompeii yielded hundreds of scrolls, how many more might lie buried, and what lost masterpieces could they contain? Equally promising are palimpsests, the parchment ghosts hiding in plain sight. In an age before paper was plentiful, medieval scribes often recycled parchment by scraping away old texts to make room for new ones. But the original writing never fully disappeared. With multispectral imaging, a technique that uses different light wavelengths to highlight faded ink, researchers have uncovered erased works by Archimedes, lost gospels, and even early copies of Cicero's speeches lurking beneath later religious texts. The Archimedes palimpsest alone revealed 2 treatises previously known only by title, including his groundbreaking Method of Mechanical Theorems, which anticipates calculus by nearly 2 millennia. These aren't just recoveries, they're time capsules preserving ideas that slipped through history's cracks. The hunt for lost knowledge has entered a golden age of technological ingenuity. Researchers are now deploying artificial intelligence to reassemble fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls like a cosmic jigsaw puzzle, matching handwriting patterns and content across scattered pieces. In Egypt, archaeologists use muon tomography, a cousin of the technology behind CT scans, to peer through pyramid walls, hoping to uncover hidden chambers that might contain sealed papyri. Even the soil itself is becoming a source of text recovery, with DNA analysis detecting microscopic traces of ink on pottery shards where scrolls once rested. These methods would have seemed like sorcery to the librarians of Alexandria, yet they're giving us something priceless: the ability to read what fire, time, and neglect tried to erase. But the most poignant recoveries aren't always technological. Sometimes they're the result of sheer persistence. Take the case of the Cairo Geniza, a synagogue storeroom where centuries of worn-out Hebrew manuscripts were preserved due to a religious prohibition against destroying texts containing God's name. When scholars finally catalogued its contents in the late 19th century, they found over 300,000 fragments, including lost works by the medieval Jewish philosopher Maimonides and early versions of the Talmud. Similarly, Tibetan monks safeguarded Sanskrit medical texts in remote mountain monasteries, preserving Ayurvedic knowledge that had vanished from India itself. These discoveries prove that while Alexandria's central repository is gone, the human instinct to preserve endures in unexpected places. Of course, not every loss can be undone. For all our advances, we'll never reconstruct the full breadth of Alexandria's holdings: the plays of Sophocles that burned, the Babylonian star charts that crumbled, the personal letters that turned to dust. But each fragment we recover chips away at the void. When researchers recently deciphered a charred scroll from Herculaneum discussing the sensory nature of pleasure, they weren't just reading an ancient text. They were overhearing a conversation silenced for millennia, a voice from the shadows reminding us that the past is never truly gone, just waiting for the right tools, the right minds, and the right moment to speak again. There's a particular ache that comes from standing in the ruins of what was once magnificent, not just because of the stones that remain, but because of the voices we can no longer hear. The loss of Alexandria's library isn't merely an intellectual catastrophe. It's an emotional wound that lingers across millennia. Think of it like overhearing a fragment of a conversation in a crowded room, a phrase so captivating you strain to hear the rest, only to realize the speakers have moved on forever. That's what happens when we encounter references to lost works like Aristotle's dialogues on comedy or Sappho's missing verses. We're left with echoes, teasing us with glimpses of brilliance we'll never fully grasp. This grief isn't abstract. It's the same pang we feel when a grandparent dies before sharing their life story, or when a childhood home is demolished, taking with it the tangible memories of first steps and family gatherings. The scrolls that burned weren't just vessels of information, they were snapshots of humanity's intellectual adolescence. the raw, unfiltered moments when someone first grasped the shape of the earth or penned a line of poetry so perfect it made readers weep. Their absence leaves us orphaned from parts of our collective past, forever wondering what insights or comforts they might have offered. Consider how differently we might understand ancient civilizations if their full literary record had survived. The plays of Menander, often compared to Shakespeare, could have given us an unbroken thread connecting classical humor to modern comedy. Instead, we're left with a single complete play and a handful of fragments, like trying to reconstruct Hamlet from a few soliloquies and a stage direction. The emotional resonance of these losses hits hardest when we realize how much context has evaporated. A medical text isn't just a list of treatments, it's a window into the fears and hopes of people facing illness without modern science. A lost history isn't just missing facts, it's the silencing of witnesses who could have told us how it really felt to watch Troy burn or to meet Cleopatra in person. What amplifies this sorrow is the randomness of what survived. Chance determined whether a scroll crumbled or endured, whether a scribe copied a text or left it to decay. The whims of time preserved Caesar's military memoirs but erased the memoirs of the women who ruled alongside him. We have Aristotle's lecture notes but lost the personal letters where he might have revealed his doubts and inspirations. This unevenness distorts our view of history like a jigsaw puzzle with half the pieces missing. We can guess at the full picture, but the gaps leave us forever uncertain. Yet there's an unexpected solace in this collective mourning. The very fact that we feel this loss, that we care about scrolls burned 2,000 years ago, speaks to something profound about human nature. Our desire to reach back through time, to clasp hands with the past, is a testament to the bonds that connect us across the centuries. Alexandria's ghost reminds us that knowledge isn't just about facts. It's about continuity, the unbroken chain of curiosity and wonder that defines us as a species. Every time we lament a vanished text, we're honoring the impulse that built the library in the first place, the stubborn, beautiful refusal to let the light go out. The memory of Alexandria's ashes lingers in the silent hum of server farms and the meticulous work of digital archivists today. Modern institutions have taken the library's greatest tragedy, centralization, and turned it into a rallying cry for dispersal. The Internet Archive, for instance, doesn't just store web pages, it scatters them across mirrored servers on 3 continents, ensuring that even if one facility burns, the data lives elsewhere. This isn't just backup, it's a philosophical reckoning with history's fragility. When a single library held all the world's knowledge, its destruction meant irrevocable loss. Now, projects like Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe embody the opposite principle. That survival depends on multiplying copies until erasure becomes impossible. But redundancy alone isn't enough. Alexandria's scrolls were vulnerable not just to fire, but to gatekeeping hoarded by elites, then lost when their guardians fell. UNESCO Memory of the World program confronts this by democratizing access. Its digital repositories preserve everything from ancient Mesopotamian tablets to recordings of indigenous languages on the brink of extinction, but crucially, they're designed for use, not just storage. Unlike the Ptolemy's confiscated scrolls, these resources are freely available to a farmer in Kenya studying climate-resistant crops or a student in Brazil researching pre-colonial histories. The lesson is clear: knowledge preserved but locked away might as well be ash. The real innovation, though, lies in collaboration. Where Alexandria competed to monopolize texts, modern networks like the Digital Public Library of America and Europeana pool resources across borders. When war threatened Ukraine's cultural heritage in 2022, archivists from 30 countries raced to digitize manuscripts, museum catalogs, and even street art. uploading over 40 terabytes of data to secure clouds within weeks. This global safety net mirrors how medieval monks preserved classical texts by copying them in scattered monasteries, but at light speed and with infinite precision. The difference: today's archivists aren't working in isolation. They're nodes in a living web, constantly reinforcing each other's work. Yet the greatest shift isn't technological, it's cultural. Alexandria's fall taught us that preservation can't be left to rulers or institutions with shifting priorities. Programs like Wikipedia's Eratosthenes or community-led efforts to digitize oral histories recognize that saving knowledge is everyone's responsibility. In India, volunteers are mapping crumbling temples with 3D scanners before they vanish. In Senegal, griot's traditional storytellers are recording epic narratives that once existed only in memory. These projects understand what the Ptolemies didn't. That knowledge stays alive not in vaults but in circulation, passed hand to hand like a torch in the dark. The irony is profound. 21st century tools are healing a wound 2,000 years old, proving that while fire can destroy a library, the idea behind it is indestructible. Every time a teenager edits a wiki article or a scientist publishes open access research, they're rebuilding Alexandria, not as a place but as a promise that this time we won't let the light go out. Hollywood loves a good fire, flames licking at priceless scrolls, crowds screaming as the greatest library in history vanishes in a single night. But the real story of Alexandria's downfall wasn't a blockbuster spectacle. It was a slow unraveling, a death by 1,000 cuts that holds far more warnings for us today. Think of it like a tree rotting from the inside. The outer structure might stand for years, but the moment it falls, everyone acts shocked. The library didn't just collapse in one fiery catastrophe. It withered through generations of misplaced priorities, political squabbles, and the quiet, creeping assumption that someone else would take care of it. Take the funding cuts first. The Ptolemies had treated the library like a crown jewel, bankrolling scribes, translators, and expeditions to track down rare texts. But as Rome's grip on Egypt tightened, budgets shrank. Scholars who once dined on royal stipends found themselves scrambling for patrons. Scroll maintenance, the meticulous recopying of aging texts, became sporadic, then rare. Imagine a modern research lab where the lights flicker out one by one as grants dry up. The knowledge doesn't vanish overnight, it just stagnates, fading at the edges until one day it's too late. Then there were the accidents. Caesar's fire in 48 BCE wasn't some grand act of arson, it was a military blunder, a desperate gambit during a siege that spiraled out of control. The flames likely didn't even destroy the main library, just warehouses near the docks. But here's the catch: those storage rooms held duplicates, backup copies of scrolls that existed nowhere else. Lose those and suddenly entire works are hanging by a thread, reliant on a single fragile original. It's like deleting the only backup of a hard drive and hoping the main computer never crashes. But the most insidious threat wasn't fire or neglect, it was ideology. As Christianity rose, pagan texts became suspect. Emperor Diocletian ordered alchemical writings burned, fearing rebels might use them to counterfeit gold. Centuries later, Theophilus, Alexandria's bishop, reportedly oversaw the destruction of the city's pagan temples, and likely any heretical texts within them. This wasn't mindless vandalism, it was a calculated erasure of ideas deemed dangerous. Sound familiar? From Nazi book burnings to modern censorship campaigns, the playbook hasn't changed. Knowledge doesn't just vanish when it's ignored, it's actively dismantled when it challenges power. What makes Alexandria's decline so haunting is how ordinary it was. No single villain, no grand catastrophe. just a series of small, reasonable decisions that added up to cultural amnesia. A scroll not copied because funds were tight. A scholar fleeing political unrest taking expertise with them. A text deemed unimportant and left to crumble. These micro-failures are the real threat because they're invisible until it's too late. When the last librarian walked out, locking the doors behind them, it wasn't an ending, just the final stroke in a collapse centuries in the making. The lesson isn't about guarding knowledge from fire. It's about guarding it from the slow rot of indifference, the assumption that preservation is someone else's job. Every time a modern archive loses funding, every time a language dies with its last speaker, we're replaying Alexandria's tragedy in slow motion. The library didn't fall because it was fragile. It fell because no one believed something so monumental could ever truly disappear until it did. Carl Sagan's iconic walk through the stacks of the Library of Alexandria in Cosmos wasn't just a history lesson, it was a masterclass in how grief for lost knowledge can transcend centuries. With his signature blend of wonder and solemnity, Sagan held up the library's destruction as a cautionary tale, a single moment where the course of civilization was altered. That episode, watched by millions in the 1980s, did something remarkable. It turned a 2,000-year-old tragedy into a visceral, modern heartbreak. By framing the library's loss as a collective robbery from humanity's future, Sagan gave the ancient world's greatest intellectual catastrophe an emotional weight that textbooks couldn't match. His words didn't just describe the fire, they made you feel the heat of the scrolls burning, the irreversible snap of connections between past and present. Video games like Assassin's Creed Origins took this legacy further, letting players literally step into the sandals of an ancient scholar navigating the library's halls. Ubisoft's meticulous recreation, the sun filtering through towering columns, the animated debates between philosophers, even the scent of papyrus in the air wasn't just set dressing. It was an interactive monument to what might have been. Players didn't just learn about Alexandria, they developed muscle memory for its corridors, a tactile connection to a place that no longer exists. The genius of this portrayal lies in its subtlety. By embedding the library into a quest about saving knowledge from the Templars, the game mirrored history's own stakes. Every scroll rescued in-game became a stand-in for the real ones we failed to protect. These fictionalized portrayals matter because they reshape how we remember. When Civilization VI includes the library as a wonder-granting scientific bonuses, or when Indiana Jones films hint at its secrets hidden in some forgotten tomb, they're not just Easter eggs for history buffs. They're reinventing the library as a living symbol, one that adapts to each generation's fears about censorship, forgetting, and the fragility of truth. The irony is delicious. A place built to preserve facts now thrives most vividly in fiction, its very fictionalization keeping its real legacy alive. But pop culture's greatest service might be how it democratizes the library's story. A teenager who'd never crack a history book might first encounter Alexandria through a Doctor Who episode where the Doctor mourns its burning, or a Magic, the Gathering card featuring its ruins. These gateways don't just entertain, they spark curiosity, sending players and viewers down rabbit holes of research. The library becomes more than a historical footnote. It's a shared reference point, a shorthand for the delicate dance between progress and oblivion. What unites these portrayals from Sagan's Gravitas to a LEGO Adventure Time parody is their underlying urgency. Whether solemn or satirical, they all whisper the same warning: knowledge is never permanently safe. The library's ghost haunts our screens not as a relic, but as a mirror. Every time a character in the name of the Rose risks death to save forbidden books, or a Star Trek episode pits data against deletion, we're replaying Alexandria's drama with new actors. The sets change, but the stakes don't. And that's how a building that vanished millennia ago keeps teaching us, not through its surviving scrolls, but through the stories we can't stop telling about it. The Library of Alexandria's greatest lesson isn't about the past, it's about the future we're building right now. Every time you upload a photo to the cloud, every time a scientist publishes open access research, even every time you hit save on a document, you're participating in an ancient struggle. The Ptolemies thought their marble walls and royal decrees would protect knowledge forever, but they underestimated how quickly neglect and arrogance could unravel centuries of progress. Today, we face the same crossroads, but with one crucial advantage. We've seen how the story ends. Consider Wikipedia, the closest thing we have to a modern Alexandria. It's not housed in one vulnerable building but scattered across servers worldwide. Its content shaped not by kings but by millions of ordinary people. Yet even this decentralized marvel isn't invincible. Funding shortages, censorship battles, and the slow erosion of fact-checking standards threaten it just as surely as flames threaten parchment. The difference: we have the power and the responsibility to intervene. Supporting digital archives, advocating for net neutrality, even just backing up family photos offline. These aren't mundane acts. They're stitches in a safety net meant to catch civilization's collective memory before it falls again. Alexandria's ghost whispers a paradox. Knowledge is both our most durable tool and our most fragile inheritance. Pythagorean theorem carved into clay tablets 4,000 years ago still holds true, but the insights of a brilliant thinker can vanish in an afternoon if no one bothers to preserve them. This duality should haunt us in the best way, not with fear, but with purpose. When archivists digitize crumbling newspapers or linguists record dying languages, they're doing more than saving data. They're refusing to let history's quiet voices be silenced twice. So what would the librarians of Alexandria tell us if they could see their legacy? Probably not to mourn what was lost, but to protect what remains and to share it wildly, generously, as if lives depend on it. Because they do. The next Euclid or Hypatia might be a student in Lagos or Lima, a right now, waiting for the right idea to spark their genius. Our job is to ensure that when they reach for humanity's collective wisdom, the shelves aren't empty. As this journey through history's greatest intellectual tragedy ends, let's leave not with regret, but with resolve. The library burned, but the impulse that built it, the stubborn human drive to understand, to connect, to outlast oblivion, still flickers in all of us. Keep that flame alive. Hit subscribe to keep exploring how history's echoes shape our world, and drop a comment below. If you could rescue one vanished text from Alexandria's ashes, which would it be? Your answer might just inspire someone else to become a guardian of the future's memory.